Hey there, folks. This is the Best Movie Year podcast. My name's Dan Barrett, joined in just a moment by Simon Foster. So, when Simon and I began this podcast in 2024, we agreed to 4 protocols. Now in 2025, only 1 protocol remains. Hey folks, this is the Best Movie Year podcast. My name is Dan Barrett, joined by Simon Foster. Now, on this week's program, we are taking a look at 1987's Fourth Protocol. Simon Foster, big question for you. What is your relationship with this movie?
Well, Dan Barrett, hello to you and hello to Best Movie Year watchers everywhere. This is the second week in a row that it's a first watch for me. Now,
wow,
that is unusual. I have no recollection of seeing this. This felt very much like a dad's movie to me. This is something I'd watch with my dad, or my dad might have gone to see at the movies. And I'm certainly not averse to dad movies now or then.
I mean, you are the father of daughters.
I am a father right now, and so I feel validated in watching this, finally catching up with this movie. But if you threw at me titles like The Osterman Weekend, or Eye of the Needle, or 3 Days of the Condor, then these are all movies that I would qualify as dad movies, but I would say I've seen. But I just never got around to this one, and it is to my shame, because it is awesome. And we're going to go into it, just how awesome it is in the minutes ahead. But Dan Barrett, first watch for you?
Look, definitely first watch for me. So what Simon doesn't realise is that when I first came up with the idea for this podcast and was pitching it at him, I'd gone through a list to see, what sort of movies are around in 1987, because I wanted to choose a year before I sort of threw the idea at Simon. So I was going through it, and I saw the Fourth Protocol in there pretty early, and that just kind of sealed the deal for me. I was like, yeah,
wow,
it's that sort of movie that I want to be able to see, where I certainly knew it by name, but it was a film that, I just never really got into or really had any occasion to stumble across it ever again. But, there's just so many of those films that sit there in, filmographies that, unless you make an active effort to go and see it, you're just not going to see it. So this was one of those titles, sat down, watched it for the first time. And look, this is with the knowledge that Simon had a really good time with it because he sent me a very rapturous text about it. I don't think I enjoyed it as much as you did, but I'm certainly glad I watched it. I think it's a good movie, but not a great one.
Let's have a look at the trailer. I'm going to run through the plot after that, and then we're going to get into a whole bigger thing about it.
As chairman of the KGB, I am giving you a direct order.
So what have we got?
He's a Russian, KGB agent.
You've been chosen for a mission of the utmost importance. If you are successful, you will return to honors beyond your dreams.
2 professionals. The KGB's best deep cover agent is coming west.
Tell the first courier to proceed.
Britain's best spy catcher senses danger.
Come and see your pass.
Yes, I can tell you what it is, all right. It's polonium. That's a detonator for a bomb.
Bomb?
An atomic bomb.
You're pretty sure about this, I take it?
And somewhere out there, there's a Soviet agent assembling an atomic bomb?
Yes.
While the generals conspire.
How can anyone even contemplate breaking the Fourth Protocol?
We're still missing one component.
We got your message.
While the bureaucrats scheme.
I regard this report as alarmist, irresponsible, and supported by insufficient evidence.
Evidence? Can't you read?
What do you want, Preston?
Round-the-clock surveillance, 3 teams of watchers. Everything immediately.
All right, Preston, you've got it.
Have they told you anything?
Just that he's a terrorist.
Oh, he's more than just a terrorist. He is a top Soviet agent. Pro.
A test of nerves.
RAF Baywaters.
That's a U.S. Air Force base.
That's where he's headed.
A race against the odds.
Armed and primed. You'll have 2 hours.
2 hard men on a collision course that will destroy the secret East-West treaty they call the Fourth Protocol. Now, from Frederick Forsyth, master of the suspense thriller, best-selling author of The Day of the Jackal, comes Michael Caine.
Barry! Pull out! Pull out, quickly!
Pierce Brosnan. Frederick Forsyth's The Fourth Protocol.
Simon, before you get to the plot of the movie, one of the fun things I did was I actually set up a camera in my house, okay, to watch my experience of seeing this film for the first time.
Interesting. This
Anyway,
would be
can
fun
I
to
play
watch.
a bit of footage from that right now?
All 104 minutes of it while you're watching the film, or this is just
This is probably the scene that I think sort of best exemplifies my experience of watching this movie.
Let's do that.
I think that guy's a spy.
Well, of course he's a spy. You just saw him go through spy school.
Oh, wait! I heard how this ends. It turns out the secret code was the same nursery rhyme he told his daughter. Hey, it's pretty obvious if you think about it.
Oh, shut up, Homer. No one wants to hear what you think.
That's exactly how I imagine you watching this movie, Dan Barrett. It is a complex, complicated story that, for some of us who might be used to multi-screening or have less than focused attention spans, may struggle a little bit with, but which I found completely awesome. Yeah, that's exactly how I imagine you watch movies.
Now, you did express that to me in a text message, but what you don't realise is I actually very rarely second screen with a phone. I have gotten into a habit in the last 4 or 5 years of making sure the phone is just nowhere near me. Otherwise, I just will not pay attention. So when I'm watching a movie, I do sit down and watch it proper.
Your Dan Barrett has spoken, kids. That's how you should watch a movie. Not on the phone, not on the train. Let's get to the plot very quickly.
Of course, I don't necessarily follow that in a movie. So when I'm in the cinema, I'll just break out the phone. Because, I'm getting a bit older now. I get out the iPad, so I've got the larger text type on it.
I've seen you on your laptop while you've been doing this podcast dozens of times, so that's no excuse. The plot for the Fourth Protocol. On July 1st, 1968, America, Britain and Russia signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty to help halt the spread of nuclear weapons. Stay with me, kids. While the treaty was widely publicised, 4 extra clauses were secretly agreed upon, the most devious being the Fourth Protocol, which prohibits the delivery of nuclear weapons by non-conventional means, like smuggling parts in and assembling them near a target instead of delivering through conventional methods like missiles or aircraft or stuff, but through a network of double agents. I'm in the middle of the plot run-through.
That's kind of like how most people will take a tablet sort of orally, but then there's other people that engage in it in the Fourth Protocol.
Exactly right. But through a network of double agents and corrupt officials, the KGB hatches a plan to breach the Fourth Protocol from a secret location in the English countryside. Ruthless Russian agent Petrovsky, played by Pierce Brosnan, heads to England to oversee the operation and assemble the nuclear device, while British spy catcher John Preston, Michael Caine, must race against an unknown deadline, to stop the Russian and his devastating mission. That sounds pretty exciting. And was it pretty exciting? It was pretty exciting.
Pretty exciting in a very sort of dad movie kind of a way.
Well, okay, let's run through some stats on this movie before we get into some really heavy sort of analysis of it. Was released in the UK on March 20. Now, we've had a couple of UK titles. In fact, we started the podcast with Nail and I, opening on January 1. I did a little bit of research on its UK release. It debuted at number 2. It finally took upwards of 1.2 million 1987 pounds. Spent 8 weeks on the charts. It was a minor hit. It wasn't a huge hit for everyone involved, but it was coming at very much at the end of this sort of Cold War thriller cycle, and didn't quite make the big bucks. It did go into the US on August 28, 1987, but we're going to stick with the UK release for the purpose of the podcast. Budget. How much did it cost, Dan Barrett?
Look, great question. I wouldn't imagine a lot. It seems like a pretty modest production.
$6 million US, or in 2025 bucks, that's nearly $17 million. So you're right, it is a fairly modest production. Some big sort of helicopter moments and a couple of explosions and stuff like that. But yeah, it's a fairly modest production. When it did hit the US in August of 1987, where do you think it landed box office wise?
Was it number 2 for the week? Is that what you're saying?
Or dollar wise? And then
dollar-wise?
Yeah.
Look, I did read this during the week. I don't quite remember what it was, but my understanding was it did a little bit better in the US, but still not a resounding sort of blockbuster by any means.
No, it was not. It took $12 million in 1987, or nearly $35 million in 2025 dollars, which put it number 88 on the Box Office Mojo chart for the year. So it was I think it was considered kind of filler product. I don't think anyone got behind it. It was released by Lorimar Pictures, who were a getting a lot of success with straight-to-video titles and dabbling in some big-screen movies occasionally, but...
I think they did a fair bit of syndicated television.
Yes, they did do that, yeah. The Lorimer team. So where are we sitting with this, Dan? Because I'm just so enthused about this film, so excited, but you seem to be less so, but still.
Look, there's certainly elements of the movie that I really, really liked. So I'm a big fan of British spy, things where, there's drops taking place and all that sort of business. I'm not a stranger to TV shows like The Sandbaggers from the 70s, which show a sort of similar sort of terrain. I think other elements of this I liked was a lot of it's very stoic and gentlemanly. And...
the cast of British character actors in this just goes on and on, like Michael Gough, who, of course, you know as Alfred the Butler. And
look, if we're going to talk about Michael Gough, let's just quickly play a clip of Michael Gough, which speaks really, the one scene he's in, which speaks really well to the gentlemanly vibe of this movie.
But I'd rather you didn't mention it to Harcourt Smith. Or has that little shit already got me dead and buried?
Not quite. But he does seem pretty confident he'll be your successor.
Has he got rid of all my people?
No, there are still a few flies in his ointment. John Preston in particular.
Good man, John. What's he been up to?
Well, that's what I wanted to talk to you about.
So you've got sort of British spies being very gentlemanly and sort of talking that sort of dad-friendly way. I guess because my dad's sort of the right age for this, I always just kind of look at him as being sort of period-specific for this. It just kind of fits. So you've kind of got that vibe going. I enjoy that. I enjoy the way that this is generally sort of very quiet. And when there's a moment of violence, it becomes extreme violence. It's like violence in the real world where you're actually shocked by it because it's not like a sort of, a PG sensitized bit of violence. Instead, there's one guy that needs to be disposed of very quickly. So I'm pretty sure it was Pierce Brosnan, ends up just grabbing him, pushes him down, grabs the car boots and just starts slamming at him. And it was really shocking to watch because you're watching it and it's kind of cartoonish for a second or two and then you're like, oh wait, no, this is actually just really horrific. It's moments like that and I think that really plays quite well. Pierce Brosnan's character I found to be just, very watchable. I like the storyline with him and the neighbours and the wife who's got a bit of a thing for him because she sort of sees him as being just that bit of a classy way out of her life, and there's all these elements that I like, but when you throw it all together in the gumbo of the movie, I think the problem for me is that the actual plot of it isn't really just that interesting. I guess the mechanics to get the Preston character played by Michael Caine from point A to point B to point C, I just didn't really enjoy that journey all that much.
All right, let's dabble into that. First of all, the Pierce Brosnan character. Having watched this and having had some knowledge of the next 40 years, 30-odd years of his career, this may be the best thing he ever did. Based on this...
Wait a sec, does that include Taffin?
Absolutely, it includes Taffin.
What goes on in this town is none of your business.
As long as I'm living here, it is.
Then maybe you shouldn't be living here!
Go back in.
Valid point. Also a film that I did not see until much later on, but which I thought he was terrific in. Surely at some point he was considered for the Hans Gruber role in Die Hard, because he would have been fantastic as a villain. I think Remington Steele and James Bond put a red line through what could have been a great career of villainous parts for Pierce Brosnan. He was icy cold in this, which certainly suited his Russian background, his Russian persona in this, but... the stuff he had to do, the scene, and of course we're going to give away some spoilers with this podcast, so if you're getting excited about it, maybe turn off now and come back to it after you watch the film.
The movie came out in 1987.
Exactly. Get with it, kids. The scene in which he, I believe, fails to pleasure Joanna Cassidy, and then she reads the note next to the bedside table that says, kill her, and then begs for her life, and he puts the bullet in her. I thought that was one of the most tense, most shocking scenes I've seen in the film. She's begging for her life right after they've made love and he does it with a bullet in the pillow, and it's just horrible scene. But that's which lends itself to the point that you made about the violence being specific and real and ruthless in this, and that absolutely comes across.
Sorry, with Pierce Brosnan, I just want to follow up with that idea that this is the best he is. I think what I was struck by, I don't think he'd actually have made a great career as a villain, because while I was watching this, I was too busy sort of caught up with him, almost like the way that, one watches like Don Draper get around in the world in Mad Men. Okay, he's just so handsome, and you just want to sort of buy into him.
That's on you. That's not on Pierce Brosnan. That's all about you.
That might be true, but I don't know, I was just like watching it going, first of all, I've never seen him look so handsome, and like, I'd seen him certainly in Remington Steele. Okay, because I'm a really cool guy, I have watched Remington Steele, more recently than, the mid-80s. Just my TV habits. But like, he's perfectly fine in this. He just seems like uber handsome in this movie, and I was sort of thinking about the dates, because my first like proper I understand the world and I'm of like an age to understand who these people are. So my first sort of proper experience with Pierce Brosnan was probably when he took over Bond. Okay. Which I always think was forever after this, but like it was only 8 years. Like it sort of feels like he was just so much older and more mature by the time that Bond casting sort of took place. But also, I haven't watched that movie in... When did the last one of those films come out? Like 2003?
We're talking GoldenEye was his first one, and his last one was...
the last one, I think.
Was Die Another Day or Tomorrow Never Comes? I can't remember.
Tomorrow Never Dies.
Die Another Day was the last one. That was the ice
and so
car.
After that, I had such a bad taste in my mouth that I've never gone back and rewatched any Brosnan, James Bond movies.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so I guess it's been, 22 years since I've watched it. So maybe he looks just as young in GoldenEye as he does in this.
Let's talk about, and this is something that I noticed in one specific passage of the film, very Brosnan's gay or at least bisexual subtext in this. It's all preempted by the scene in which the scientist is blackmailed by pictures of his son with a man, and then the Pierce Brosnan character very much ignores the very flirty stare and the sort of the come hither opportunity that Max Headroom's wife sort of puts towards him.
Sorry, let's be a bit clear here. So the neighbours that live across from the house that Pierce Brosnan's occupying.
Yep.
The guy, he's US military, and he's played by Matt Frewer, who obviously we know from Max Headroom or from the Stand TV miniseries.
And then when Joanna Cassidy laughs when the sex finishes, as if he couldn't perform, then I did a bit of a research and I literally typed into Google Pierce Brosnan gay Fourth Protocol, and a whole sort of chatboard come up about this is very much...
Sorry, I was thinking about your wife using a computer a few days afterwards.
My search engine is just on files everywhere right now. This sort of gay subtext, or almost gay baiting kind of storytelling is very Frederick Forsyth, who's the author upon which this novel is based, one of the best-selling authors of all time. The same kind of thing happened in the movie version of Day of the Jackal. I haven't seen the recent Eddie Redmayne version, but it may be in that as well. Yeah, I think this is very specific to Brosnan's character, that he does have there's a very sort of homosexual element. Is it homophobic if the killer has to be gay and closeted in this regard?
Well, see, I didn't really read it as him necessarily being sort of gay or closeted or bi or anything like that. The way I was reading it was... Because you've got that sequence where he's at the airport, there's the guy that's seen him do a drop.
Exactly, yes.
They are at an airport, yeah.
So how did he recognise that guy?
Well, he's seen him do the drop. Okay,
yeah.
And, he's like, okay, well, I'll, just follow this guy out because I need to dispose of him because he's seen too much.
But he recognised that guy. But he recognised that as being a gay man trying to score in a bathroom.
This is the thing. I saw that guy as... Well, I don't know if the guy was necessarily in the bathroom to score that way. I think he just kind of walked in, realised he'd walked in on something that he shouldn't have, and then sort of stepped out. Okay, but when
Brosnan recognised him as gay.
I think Pierce Brosnan's character is supposed to be able to read people remarkably well. Like, he's always looking for an opportunity to take advantage of them. And when he read that guy, he's like, oh, wait, this is a gay man. If I play it a bit gay, then, this is an opportunity. He's an opportunist as opposed to necessarily being driven by sexuality. There's the moment where the wife is making some, putting the moves onto him in a pretty major way in the car. And he comes out and, I don't know, he gets really unnecessarily angry. And to me, when I read that, and with you talking about the homosexual subtext, there is a different way to read this, which, may be the correct way to do it. But when I was looking at it, I read it more as, he was so angry that he couldn't really necessarily follow through on what was actually a pretty appealing prospect to him, only because he's so committed to the job. And to me, it was that conflict between him as a red-blooded, man with man needs versus, him as cold, steely killer who just can't necessarily follow through on the things that give him personal pleasure.
Yeah, it's interesting.
That's how I read that initially, but also, maybe it's just purely that, this woman's so cracked onto him, and then he's just angry because he knows that's what he wants, and he knows that, this is what he should be doing versus what he actually wants. Like, there's both ways of reading it, I guess.
Sure, absolutely. We've mentioned a couple times Max Headroom's wife, played by the actress Betsy Brantley. Now, have you done your research on Betsy Brantley?
I did do the research because I saw her and I was like, who is this lady? Because it sort of seemed like she should have gone on to a... maybe not necessarily a bigger career, but I guess sort of, a career of note. And she's kind of interesting.
She is. She was Fred Savage's mum in The Princess Bride. She was the performance model for Jessica Rabbit in Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and this is the real sort of kick in the teeth for me. She's the ex-wife of one Steven Soderbergh. Now they worked together on a film called Schizopolis, which I remember vaguely from back in the day.
That's the film that kind of tanked his career until he revived
exactly.
it.
And most recently, she was the voice of Kimmy in the movie with what's her name, Zoe Kravitz. So you do a little bit of research on. I'm calling that my hottie deep dive of the week. I do this occasionally where I sort of get enamored by an actress in a movie and I say, oh, I wonder what she's been up to, and it's kind of a stalker thing. But then you find out all this interesting stuff. So Betsy Brantley, very attractive. I like the way that for a film in 1987 they can get away with referring to apartheid as unfashionable domestic attitudes, which is one point they've just bring up in the film.
Look, I mean, it is 1987. Like, it just kind of, like, suddenly that time period, but also when you watch movies from around, like, the late 80s, like, conversations around apartheid become pretty prominent. I think we could all think about Lethal Weapon 2 right now with...
Exactly right.
He's blick.
Diplomatic immunity. We shouldn't. I mean, we've spoken about Pierce Brosnan. We have to mention Michael Caine in the lead role. This was sort of peak 40-ish Caine, wasn't it? This was what he was doing so well for a few years now. Yeah, it kind of felt like this is the sort of film he, I guess, was maybe sort of tidying up the reputation of his career. Like, it's not a Blame It on Rio or something like that. It's not a Jaws 4. A Jaws 4, which we'll be talking about later in the year. His interactions with Julian Glover, who played the acting boss, are terrific at the start of the film. I think it's really important casting to have Michael Caine there because he has this sort of anti-establishment streak in him that makes him likeable. We're not barracking for some stuffy suit spy catcher. It's a really well-written, well-defined character that's so important to making him sort of empathetic to us. What I found really interesting, this is one of the things that really worked for me, was that at no point do they really sort of fill in too much in terms of backstory. Like, he's kind of just a professional guy doing, like, a professional job and pissing people off at work, and when people talk about him, it's always just in those sorts of professional circumstance. But when we see him go home, about an hour into the movie, we find out that he's got a son. We find out that he's a single father. We realise the wife has presumably died at some point, but they don't actually ever tell us any of that. Like, literally, he just comes home and spends time with his son. You do wonder just how often he really is at home because one presumes he's got pretty busy. But then also, like, they don't talk about the wife at all. You just see a photo up on a mantle. That is so indicative of storytelling through the 70s and into the 80s, where this is the sort of film that trusts the audience to pick up on that and to know that. And, we're not talking, this isn't Mannequin, we're not talking some goofy American film here. We're talking about a mature sort of film aimed at the older moviegoer of the day at a point when the teen market was kind of dominating American cinemas and cinemas around the world, but which there was still a place for films like this, and it just showed really smart storytelling and smart character work to make that happen. I place a lot of that at the foot of John McKenzie, the director here. Now, I knew John McKenzie from The Long Good Friday, which is the Bob Hoskins gangster UK classic from 1980. I'd forgotten he directed Danny Aiello in a film called Ruby, which is a look at the assassin from JFK. Jack Ruby. And I'm going to put this in the newsletter when I send it out. In 1977, he made a film called Apaches, which was a 30-minute short film in which a group of children play cowboys and Indians on an English farm, and they ignore all safety precautions, and one by one they die these gruesome deaths at the hands of farm equipment.
I'm laughing already.
It was used as a public service announcement in school, and when I thought, Apaches, I remember seeing that, and I did a bit of a search on it, and apparently like a whole generation of British kids are scarred by this film because they were made to watch it in school. So, and I found a remastered copy of it on YouTube, so I'm going to put that in our newsletter.
Yeah, please do.
Do you know who Julian Glover was? You know how I know Julian Glover? He was the bad guy from Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade who ages quickly at the end, who literally dries up in front of you. So, yeah, that's Julian Glover.
Look, I knew the name. It just took me a moment to, once I did the research, I'm like, oh, wait, it's that guy. But one of the great shames of this movie, okay, and it's not the movie's fault, it's just kind of, stuff that happened afterwards, is that there's no scene with Michael Gough up against Michael Caine. Like, two of, cinema's greatest Alfred Pennyworths. Like, why do they never occupy the screen together?
That's perfect. That would be ideal, isn't it?
Yeah.
The two Alfreds duking it out. I love it. Ned Beatty.
Yes.
Let's talk about Ned Beatty's couple of scenes opposite Ray McNally.
Okay,
who's
so look,
great.
At the beginning, we played that clip of Homer Simpson just not getting it.
Yeah.
Okay, and this is the part of the movie which just washed over me entirely, and I just did not understand exactly how the Ned Beatty character was connected into it.
So, it felt almost like a different movie. It's an odd choice to put someone like Ned Beatty in that role.
Okay, first of all, it's never an odd choice to have Ned Beatty in anything. Thank you very much.
So he plays like, I guess it's a middleman in trying to bring elements of the bomb to the UK, and they need him to make it work. And McNally is the KGB operative, KGB general who's put all this into the machinations into work. He goes to Ned Beatty to try to sort out how this is all going to work. Ned Beatty gives some really hammy acting in this role. In a film that's very sort of stoically British, he does some real eye-rolling to the back of the theatre sort of acting in this, and having said that, he felt very much like a plot delivery man, where he had to sort of punch the points out so we understood the plot. And I don't know whether the film could have done without those scenes, because there's some information in there, but it could have been done better.
I think it absolutely could have done without them. But that said, I love Ned Beatty, so I was just very happy to see him on screen.
Yep, absolutely true.
Also,
any other observations?
Well, just because you've talked through a number of cast members at this point, the last one we obviously need to talk about is Ian Richardson. Okay, Ian Richardson, who, look, probably... There's, I guess, maybe sort of two roles that I think probably are worth discussing sort of in relation to this movie. So first of all... interesting. Well, one of his bigger roles was in the original film version of Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy.
Yes, it was.
Okay, which, this obviously feels sort of...
cut from the same cloth.
TV series, sorry. So it feels very much sort of a piece with that. And if I was to criticize this movie, I think the cinematography at times does feel very TV movie. Okay, and not always. I think that there's certainly cinematic flourishes here and there. Okay, where it feels like a movie, but there's enough times where it just kind of feels like one of those really good sort of British spy productions from the 70s and 80s.
Sure.
There's definitely a vibe they're going for in the movie. And it's definitely to harken back to that TV experience. And so I think that's certainly present on there. So the fact that he was in the Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy adaptation, I think, notable. But when you watch the sort of political machinations that are taking place in this movie and having Ian Richardson's character at the centre of all of that, I couldn't stop thinking about him in House of Cards, because he's very much playing that character. So this is obviously the original House of Cards.
Totally forgot that was... Yeah, you're absolutely right.
How can you forget that? It's Ian Richardson. He's just on screen. I'm like, oh my God. It's him.
See, I'm kind of a Monty Python nerd. I think of Ian Richardson's from Time Bandits. He was the ultimate being in Time Bandits. So, which was a silly role for him and a lot of fun that he had doing it, but... he's got a storied history, and this cast is full of those sort of actors. I made the point earlier that this was coming very much at the end of that Cold War thriller, paranoia cinema kind of, era, and
also at the end of the Cold War as well.
Well, exactly right. Yeah, it was becoming in a very anachronistic and a very old-fashioned sort of story, and it was becoming more a modern history piece than a current piece. And I think watching it now, we're able to put it in some kind of different perspective from the period, and I think it helps it immeasurably to be able to look back and watch it in that regard. Also, helicopters. These films did helicopters really well. Those scenes where the two helicopters are flying under the bridge. Just totally awesome. Some of the greyness of the film made it look like a TV movie. I grant you that. And a TV movie as we understand TV movies are now. Back then, I think it was a pretty spectacular widescreen sort of undertaking.
Simon?
Yes.
This is your big screen bias taking place. 80s television, particularly American 80s television, is rife with helicopters everywhere.
Yeah.
It is amazing going back and watching old episodes of, the A-Team or any sort of just generic 80s actioner. And there were just constantly helicopter stunt sequences. Every episode would have an extended 4-minute helicopter.
You're absolutely right. And
and it's like, how do they do that? Like on modern day TV budgets, they'd always talk about, we could afford a helicopter once a season. Okay, if that. It was every week you'd find helicopters. It was crazy.
I've never been in a helicopter. Have you ever flown in a helicopter?
Never done it.
I want to do that so badly and dive with sharks, but not in a helicopter.
I'll never fly in anything with a propeller.
That me.
Well, not an external propeller.
Okay, good. All right.
Yeah.
All right, look.
It's glass elevators everywhere for me.
The most memorable scene. Let's get to that. Did you have anything else you wanted to add to our observations?
Look, not really. I mean, this is there's certainly sequences. There's certainly sequences in this that really sort of stand out. Sorry, this is getting to the memorable scene. There's certainly sequences that sort of stand out. So I kind of like that first scene where he's being taken through the house with a real estate agent. Just because, they don't actually reveal that it's next to an airport until, he goes and looks out the window.
Base,
and it's like, oh,
US
wait.
Air Force Base.
Yeah, that's a bit interesting.
Yep.
So it was kind of like those sorts of reveals all the way through the film, and that was the first sort of big one that I really noticed. I kind of like that. I like that sequence. Again, it's the Pierce Brosnan going out with that couple from across the road.
Max Headroom.
I just kind of thought that was a good bit of humanity that was kind of thrown in with a character like that. I think it's so easy in these sorts of movies to see the steely, cold-blooded killer as just being that. But to see him forced to go out and start, interacting with the neighbours, to me it sort of elevated the film to be a little bit more interesting than you'd usually see from, a role like that. The most memorable scene for me is probably the scene where it's certainly one of the most action-filled sequences. Michael Caine gets on the phone and is like, oh, we've got to go and do this. Be ready in 5 minutes. So he gets out the front of the house. Suddenly the car pulls up. He jumps in. It's like, well, we've got to get to this guy who's on the train. So they go speeding to the train and go driving straight into the train station.
That was
going
awesome.
along the platform. Get up to the side of the train, and the train is well and truly leaving the station, at which point Michael Caine jumps out of the train, runs about 5 or 6 meters, does a big leap onto the train, and then just gets in. And first of all, it's just cool.
It is very cool.
In a low-stakes sort of real way that actually happens. Not that you ever see cars going racing through a train station, but if that was to happen, it would be exactly as it plays out there, which would be he gets out of the car, he doesn't hang off the side of the car and then leap over or anything. It's not silly like that. He kind of does what a human being does. But then he gets onto the train, and he's not huffing and puffing, but he's certainly tired. And you see him, he identifies the guy on the train, and then he's like, okay, the guy's there, and then he just sits down and catches up.
And you know what's funny? Halfway through my notes here, and I skimmed over it because I'd scrolled down, I had the point... train station stunt driving.
Yeah.
It was such an awesome scene.
And the car does one of those sort of, quick U-turns.
Quick 180s. And
yeah, fantastic.
That was a great, great scene. And it sort of came out of nowhere too. They were hurrying to the airport, but suddenly it's up on the platform and people are jumping out of them.
But that's the thing with the action in this. It's the same as the violence, which is that, it's kind of very quiet.
Matter of fact.
Until suddenly it's just not anymore. Yeah.
I want to shout out very quickly before I get to my most memorable scene, 3 cheers for Barry. I think Barry was doing the driving through that moment when they got on the platform. He also takes the van off-road when they get stopped at the police operations, get stopped at the car accident, and he's got to take the van off the road to catch up with Pierce Brosnan. Barry, there were some classic Barry moves in this one. I don't know the actor, but he was terrific in this. So, to me, the most memorable scene is the sequence where Pierce Brosnan and Joanna Cassidy are building the bomb and revealing all the elements of the bomb that are coming together. And she's saying, careful, don't bump it or it'll go off. And then we're going to suspend it here and tighten the screws so that it sort of levitates kind of in the middle of its structure to hold it in place. I thought that was really exciting and very tense. That you may not see modern filmmakers take the time to construct something like that, but it's certainly put into a perspective exactly what we're up against here, a legitimate nuclear explosion. Also, the final fight in the attic where the detonation button is right there at the fingertips and Brosnan's going for it and Caine's kicking him in the head, and it was a
There's that really great, again, another great reveal. Okay, you got Pierce Brosnan. He makes his way into the attic, and he's just like been shooting at some guy down in the hallway, and like I think he may have lost a finger or two, at least half his finger, on the way up. But he gets in there, and then he sort of looks up and realizes that the skylight has been tampered with. So clearly somebody has come through the thing, and he turns around, and suddenly Michael Caine, Batman, like sort of leaps out from the shadows, and he's kind of right there.
It was very cool. Very cool. Do we have an MVP in this? I would say for me it's Brosnan on screen, but I think overall, and because of his contribution to these sort of movies with Day of the Jackal and the Odessa File and a great Christopher Walken movie called The Dugs of War, I'm saying the author Frederick Forsyth, in hindsight, was a contributor to some great films. So he's probably my MVP.
Producer of the film as well.
Yeah.
Okay, first one, I'm just going to take a quick back step. The guy that played Barry is a guy named Matthew Marsh. Okay, who has had a extensive career in movies and TV since this film came out. So his career kicked off in 81, so this is kind of, early-ish for him. Okay, but fairly recently, the Tetris movie, which you may have seen, played Mikhail Gorbachev in that.
What? The Taron Egerton thing with they... Oh, okay. Wow, okay.
Yeah, so, still well and truly active
around.
Well and truly active. But you go through and, like, it's a who's who, well, a what's what of British TV programs. Like, he's just been in everything every year.
Yeah, that's huge.
Constantly around. Most recently, he did an episode of Vera.
Quality show.
Look, to give an idea, in the last couple of years, he's done episodes of Vera, Father Brown, The Nevers, Grantchester. He's
a working actor.
Yeah. He's 70.
All those shows got the Barry bump.
So many. It's that coveted Barry bump.
Does that mean that Barry's your MVP?
No, not at all. My MVP... Look, I mean, there's a bunch of people that really stood out to me. Like, I don't think this movie is anywhere near as memorable as it is without, like, the really good Brosnan performance. But to me, the MVP is Ian Richardson.
Okay.
Yeah, and look, there's just a lot of baggage that comes with Richardson from House of Cards, so maybe that sort of ties into it a little bit, but... I don't know, he elevated what was just a guy in a suit role to having that sort of Machiavellian sort of, slightly... It's not quite a camp role. He's certainly a lot more camp in House of Cards than he is in this, but it's camp adjacent.
All right, let's rock on to our final thoughts. I don't think it's widely considered as one of the great Cold War thrillers. I think if it had a reputation like that, I would know about that and I would have definitely watched it. But having watched it, I think it should be, because it is. I think it is a great Cold War thriller, tells a lean, mean story really well, and is a very exciting film. You got any final thoughts?
I'm not sure I'd use that it's an exciting movie. I think that it's certainly got quite a few exciting moments throughout the movie, and it's certainly got some fairly compelling moments. I don't know the film necessarily entirely works as much as you really got into it, but there's definitely an audience for this movie who will be very excited by the movie.
That's me.
It just taps into a lot of the sort of, British Cold War era spy films and is a good example of one of those. But I don't know that I'd necessarily be sort of recommending it to too many people that it's a must-see movie. But if they are talking about, I really like this genre, I'd certainly flag this as a, hey, did you ever see The Fourth Protocol? And I think that would probably be a well-received recommendation.
So, as far as it being, for the point of this podcast, does it help define 1987 as the best movie year ever? I think it's hard to nail down as indicative of 1987 as a great film year because this genre kind of had its heyday many years prior, and its DNA in this is very much from the 70s thrillers, but that
it's funny you say that because the cover art for this looks very much like a 70s spy thriller.
Absolutely, yeah.
And until we got down to the business of sorting this out as a title for our podcast, I always thought this was a 70s spy thriller.
Sure. I'm going to err on the side of loving this film and saying that, yes, it does add to the argument that 87 was the best film year ever.
Yeah, look, this is a film which I'd never seen it before. I quite liked it and can easily envision me coming back to rewatch this film a number of times in the years to follow.
As you get older and grey.
That's exactly it. As I further embed my sort of dad life, I think this will definitely...
Can I tell you my Pierce Brosnan story very quickly?
Sure.
I grew up on the Central Coast of New South Wales, and one of my early sort of infatuations was a young girl that I met on the beach, whose name I can't remember. I was very young. She says, "You look like someone off television." And I said, "Oh, this is nice." And
So was Alf on TV at that point?
And she said, I'll give you a clue, the initials are PB. And instantly my head went to, oh, she thinks I look like Pierce Brosnan. This is all good. And I went, is it Pierce Brosnan? And she goes, no, Peter Brady from the Brady Bunch. Which I also took as a win, because...
I can see the Peter Brady in you.
Yeah, I know. I get that a lot, actually. All right.
I'm surprised I haven't noticed it before.
Yeah. Okay, that brings us to the end of this week's Best Movie Year podcast. We have got a few weeks ahead of us where we bring the funny, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, this is getting into one of those sort of stretches of quite a few titles I was pretty excited to be doing this podcast for. So next week we got the Bruce Willis movie Blind Date. It's him opposite
Kim Basinger.
Yes,
beautiful Kim Basinger.
This is a movie that I don't know if I've ever actually watched all of. I certainly know scenes from this movie. I feel it was one of these films that maybe my parents had rented out on video, and I'd maybe sort of watch it a little bit, just in the background. Like, I was probably too young for this movie when they were watching it, but I still sort of tapped into it. And then after that, we got Police Academy 4, Citizens on Patrol, The Secret of My Success, Project X. Like, this is a good run of weeks.
This is a good run of podcast material. I'm very excited. This podcast's coming together nicely. You say this was your idea, Best Movie Year 87? You came to me with that? I remember it differently.
I've got the emails to back it up, Simon.
Oh, shit. All right. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Dan, take us out.
Folks, this has been the Best Movie Year podcast, where we look at the films of 1987, at least for the next 40-odd weeks. My name's Dan Barrett, joined by Simon Foster. If you want to find us elsewhere on the internet, certainly do so. You can find me. I run a daily-ish newsletter called Always Be Watching. Track that one down at alwaysbewatching.com. It's free to sign up and gives you a whole bunch of interesting news stories and just feature stories about the world of TV streaming and movies, as long as they're kind of streaming or on like a TV screen. So talking about all that, and then other stuff that just randomly crops up that I find interesting that's a bit screen adjacent. And Simon Foster, you run the Screen Space website.
I do indeed. A similar website that does all sorts of movie news, reviews, interviews, fun things that happen in the world of film that I like to cover with my long-form film writing. So do check that out.
Fantastic. Well, folks, this has been the podcast. We'll be back next week. If you enjoy the podcast, if you're listening to it on a podcast platform, leave a review. Helps people find the show. If you're watching it on YouTube, as they say, like and subscribe. Maybe leave a comment in the comment section, which is right below there. We do listen, we do read. Folks, this has been Best Movie Year. We'll be back next week.